The Race to Imagine, in collaboration with the Global Business School Network, sponsored by Universidad de los Andes School of Management, and in partnership with the Miami Herbert Business School. This first session as part of this Race to Imagine series, of course, all about collaborations for healthcare leadership. My name is Rob Vember. I'm a senior advisor with the Global Business School Network. Apologies at the outset for the slight delay, technical gremlins, still an issue so many months into COVID, having to deal with all of these things. I'm sure you will forgive us from the outset. We're ready and rearing to go. So I look forward to spending some time with you as we work through this important session about such a vitally important issue, as we've all come to certainly know, but appreciate even more over the course of the last number of months as a result of the pandemic. A couple of housekeeping rules, if I may. We'll ask you at various points to either turn your camera off or turn your camera on. And of course, you'll remain muted unless otherwise asked to unmute yourself if there's a pertinent question or a burning issue that you may have and want to discuss. For the main, please do make use of the chat function right here at the bottom of the Zoom screen. That's available to you to ask any questions, to make any comments. And right now, in fact, it would be really helpful if you introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us who you are, tell us where you're from, and if you're with a particular institution or organization, any one of the schools involved or other, then please do let us know exactly where you are so that everyone else in the room gets to know a bit more about you. We have so many great speakers and so many great sessions as part of this event lined up for you, not just today, but over the course of the coming weeks. And on that little technical note, just to know that we're going to stay in this one room. As you may have logged into the lobby, you may have seen various different buttons for each specific section of this particular session today, but we're going to stay in this one room for the duration of the next 2 or so hours. And you'll forgive me, I may be a bit maybe a bit rich of me to ask you right now, but I'm going to ask all of our speakers to please stick to time. Of course, we're running slightly late and we account for that, so we're not going to rush you insofar as the minutes that you have been allocated, but we are going to ask that we all respect each other's times and that speakers please stick to their allotted time. If all else fails, we'll have to pull out some violins or play some Oscar music to get you off the stage, so to speak. I'll also be sure if you're really kind of hitting the marker, to give you a moment or two's warning before we may need to end your particular presentation and move you along. But to give you some more context as to what the Race to Imagine is all about, collaborations for healthcare leadership, talking about this particular Race to Imagine session, but also the next couple of sessions. It's my pleasure to welcome, to address you, the CEO of the Global Business School Network, Dan Leclerc. Dan?
Thanks so much, Rob. I first want to add my warmest welcome to everyone who's joined us today. I understand we have participants not only from Colombia and the US, but also from places far away from the Americas. So welcome everyone to this first session of the Race to Imagine series. Now I'm very excited about today's event and want to start by congratulating and thanking everyone, especially Dean Andanova and her team at Uniandes, the whole Uniandes community, and Professor Caroline Mortensen and her colleagues at Miami Herbert Business School, who are leaders in the space of healthcare management along with Uniandes. So I just want to start by congratulating and thanking everyone, the whole team that's been involved in putting this together. Now, what I love about Race to Imagine, and this session in particular, is reflected in the title, Race to Imagine, and the work of GBS and beyond. It's really about breaking barriers, breaking down barriers, removing obstacles to imagination and innovation. It's about bridging divides, and it's about connecting across sectors, government, business, civil society, and academia to build a new and better future. Now, in addition to this being about, for example, healthcare in this session, we think Race to Imagine is also about the future of higher education, about the future of business education. I'm not talking about what you see on the screen, but I'm talking about who is behind that screen. I'm talking about what tech enables you to do in today's environment. Higher education, it's about bringing together people. It's about bringing them together to share their experiences, their knowledge, but also to create new ideas, to build new things. And so I think one of the things that's special about Race to Imagine is that it's about these experiences. It's about the future of higher education and what we could do together, not only locally. We know this happens locally, but how do we bring the global community together to help and to support and to innovate locally? And that's what this Race to Imagine is all about. And that's why we're particularly excited. Race to Imagine is a big step for GBSN, and we're just proud to be here to support it. So welcome again, and I'm going to turn it back over to Rob.
Thank you so much, Dan, and we'll keep moving swiftly along. And I'm pleased, Caroline, you've made it. You're in the room. We're a bit stressed for a second, but you're here, and that's all that matters. And we're very thankful to have you and the whole team on board from Miami Herbert Business School. So, Associate Professor and in the Department of Health Sector Management and Policy at Miami Herbert Business School, Caroline Mortensen. Over to you for a few minutes.
Thank you for the introduction, Rob, and thank you everyone for your patience. As Rob mentioned, I'm Caroline Mortensen, an associate professor in the Miami Herbert Business School. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Global Business School Network staff for hosting this program, and to the University de los Andes for including the University of Miami in this innovative collaboration. The University of Miami is a private research institution located in Coral Gables, Florida, with more than 17,000 undergraduate and graduate students from around the world. University of Miami's vibrant and diverse academic community focused on teaching and learning, the discovery of new knowledge, and service to the South Florida region and beyond. The university has a big focus on healthcare with the health system, hospitals, and a school of medicine. Our university president, Julio Frank, is an MD, PhD, and a global health leader who has even served as the health minister of Mexico. President Frank led the university with a science-based approach to reopening in person fall 2020 during the pandemic when many universities remained virtual. Our Miami Herbert Business School Dean John Quelch, also has a strong background in healthcare marketing and is one of the most prolific Harvard Business Review case study writers in the world. Our Health Management and Policy Department faculty teach and conduct research on the financing, delivery, and organization of the healthcare system. Our department is probably the only one in the world to have not one, but two former secretaries of Health and Human Services, with Secretary Shalala and Secretary Azar, whom you will hear from today. We are very excited about this unique collaboration with UniAndes and GBSN and the global reach of this program. Race to Imagine provides our students, faculty, and community of scholars an opportunity to engage in meaningful collaborations on really important issues that affect health and business today. So thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to today's program.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Good to have you with us, and thanks so much for all the effort that you've put into making sure that today works and runs, and we're looking forward certainly to hearing those speakers as they represent Miami Herbert Business School. Next up, as we kind of round off the introductions, of course, none of this would be possible without the likes of Dean Vanetta Andanova, who's Dean at Universidad de los Andes School of Management. Vanetta, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Caroline, for the welcoming words. I'd like to share your enthusiasm, and I'd like to speak a bit about UniAndes. Universidad de los Andes School of Management is the leading educational institution in Colombia. That's the fourth largest economy in Latin America. And UniAndes is ranked among the top 4 universities in the Latin American area. It excels in the professional growth and success of its students and alumni. The School of Management executive education programs are in the top 50 distinguished programs in the list of Financial Times, and our alumni network as of today consists of true business leaders and decision makers whose decisions affect approximately 14% of the Colombian GDP. And we have a large community of alumni who are in public service positions. The impact for good that the School of Management can generate for the country, Latin America, and the world are huge. And that's why we are so happy and so grateful for this collaboration with GBSN, to the team of Dan and Nicole, to Caroline and Miami Herbert Business School because we believe that through sharing and co-creation, we can actually leverage this opportunity and establish a dialogue for good of the local communities. The problems that the Colombian leaders need to address are ultimately solve are global. And these problems are related today to a large extent to healthcare leadership. And we deeply believe that it can only be done in constant dialogue, sharing, and learning from the global community of business leaders and decision makers. We live in a period of great change, acceleration, and experimentation across the globe. And we think that close dialogue with top-notch global institutions facilitate understanding, can minimize mistakes, and maximize mutual learning through best practices and impact stories. The outcome of sharing these stories, which are part of what we are gathered together to share today, will be to promote new initiatives that need to be undertaken in the near future and to provide solutions to the local challenges. I'd like at the end to thank the teams of Uniandes, the teams of Miami Herbert Business School, and in particular, Carlene Morgenstern and our team, in particular, Vincian Cervanti, who have been collaborating and coordinating this initiative. And I hope that you all can feel the energy, enthusiasm, and drive to bring positive change to the local context that we all share. Thank you very much. And I'm turning it back to you, Rob.
Thanks so much, Dina, and over to you and your team for all of the work that you've put into making sure that this works. And also, of course, just generally all the great research and focus you're putting into this very important area as well. So we're happy to have you and the team along. We're doing good for time, making up some good time as well. So I'm going to keep the ball rolling. A reminder to you to please feel free to make use of the chat function throughout the course of proceedings. Questions, comments you may have, you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat as well. We'll ask for the moment that you please keep your videos off. And just a reminder for anyone who may have joined us a bit late, we're going to stay in this room throughout the course of the session. So there's no need to leave and necessarily come back to join any one of the other sessions. We'll stay on this particular Zoom session. So our first impact story, I'm very pleased to introduce Estefania Hernandez, was a second-year PhD student in management at Uniandes. She graduated from the business administration faculty with complementary studies in information technology in organizations. She's interested in understanding the social dynamics that underlie regional development in Colombia, mainly through the analysis of entrepreneurship and family business. Estefania, you're most welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, so I'm sharing you my screen. Hello, my name is Estefania Hernandez, and today I want to share with you the story of a project that transcends disciplines and communities, and especially how did I end up in an initiative that is right now about to vaccinate 75,000 people for COVID-19 in Bogota, in 3 peripheral neighborhoods with difficult social and economic conditions that are Usme, Ciudad Bolívar, and Bosa. I will talk about these neighborhoods later. 1 year ago, I was starting my PhD in management in the Universidad de los Andes, and I was looking for an experience that showed me what was being a scholar, what comes after doing a PhD, and what does research in real life looks like. So that's why, to achieve that, I entered to a project called COLEB. As you can see in the slide, it's a project that from the very beginning was structured and conceived in a multidisciplinary manner, involving professors, students, and postdoctorates from more than 10 disciplines. And this project aim is to give a response to some of the challenges of COVID-19 from the artificial intelligence and data science usage, from the perspective and research of 5 different teams that contribute from different fields of study to the main goal. I participate in the third one, that is health management and COVID-19. And this team has been interested in providing insightful information for the decision makers about COVID-19 vaccination in Colombia. And the first statement that we make at the beginning was saying, hey, like, COVID-19 vaccination is not only a health problem, it's also a logistic problem, and we have the resources and the knowledge to cooperate and share key takeaways from our analysis with the health authorities. Thus, we started tracking the progress of COVID-19 vaccination, mainly from a logistic point of view. And we developed a dashboard that, additional to the basic progresses indexes of vaccination, it provided a logistic point of view with some inventory and capacity management. As you can see in the screen that I'm showing this graph, the evidence about the real capacity that the country had and how we could finish vaccination earlier than expected is showed here. This was important information at that time, and this proposal implied, it was not easy, it implied management, like a different management of resources, inventory, and infrastructure. So we started sharing this with health authorities and organizations interested in contributing to the national plan too. Our two main allies in the process were Fundación Santo Domingo and an association of health organizations, Así Vamos en Salud. And by that time, Fundación Santo Domingo had already implemented some vaccination points in two main cities of Colombia, Barranquilla and Manizales. And we were invited to visit these cities in order to observe the process and take some measurements about the duration of activities, to then run a simulation and propose some options for improvement of the process, and also like some insights about the bottlenecks of the process. So this is like the vaccination points, and this is what process simulation results looks like. This was important because by that time we had like the knowledge of specific process performance and also the general knowledge that the dashboard provided us. So we started sharing this with people that wanted to also contribute to the national vaccination plan. This slide, you can show some of the allies in this process. We started working mainly with the COVID project that is also from Universidad de los Andes, and they have been actively responding to COVID-19 challenges since the very beginning. They developed a laboratory to help with positivity tests. And then when vaccination was around the corner, they decided that they wanted also to help there, but with one specific condition, and it was helping population with difficult social and economic conditions, where government has not been able to arrive with the vaccination points, or where there's people with scarce resources that do not allow them like to go to other vaccination points in the cities. In these places, the behavior of the COVID-19 curves and incidence of cases was high, and the vaccination coverage was low. So Fundación Santo Domingo, who already had experience in implementing vaccination points, joined this initiative too. And with collaborative work and collective actions among these organizations, today we are proud to say that all these collective efforts paid off, and we have 3 vaccination points that were open in Unpe, Ciudad Bolívar, and Bosa. This is important because Bogotá, the capital of Colombia, has an 8 million population, but these localities cover almost the 50% of that population. The locations where the majority of displaced people is concentrated are these 3 districts. Particularly Ciudad Bolívar urban portion includes one of the world's largest mega slums and is mainly composed by immigrants. That is a special population. And 75% of the people in the city of Bogotá with unsatisfied basic needs are concentrated in 7 localities, 3 of them being those 3. So this is just to show you that this is a high impact that we're having here. Those are peripheral areas, and arriving then has been for us like a great effort, but also a great satisfaction. The goal is to apply, like to administer 75,000 vaccines in 3 months. And the title of the presentation says, this initiative transcended discipline and communities, because the commonality among all the achievements that I just told you was the willingness to work in a collaborative way among disciplines and organizations. The project clearly shows that it is possible for governments to develop inclusive strategies that do not leave behind sparse populations or people with special conditions, such as immigrants. That is, we have vaccinated 80% of the people that we have vaccinated has been immigrants, as the women that I'm showing you in this video.
Flores, ciudadanos venezolanos, y aquí con mi hija, conjuntamente al CDC Porvenir, nos colocaron la vacuna contra el COVID-19. No tuvimos necesidad de tener permiso, ninguna, solamente nuestra cédula y la cédula de la niña.
In 10 days of operation there, we have administered 11,000 vaccines, which is translated into 2,000 vaccines schedules completed with 2nd doses and 5 schedules completed with vaccines of just 1 dose, meaning by this that we have saved around 7,000 lives. Also, as you can see here, another dashboard has been developed for tracking the performance of the project and implemented improvements in real time, with the favorable difference that we now have access to more data regarding population characteristics that allow us to develop more specific and detailed analysis. Finally, regarding my 1 year ago questions about what research looks like in real life, I right now would say it is an iterative process that takes time and is best built with the people that have critical positions and points of view different from mine to complement my perspective and these solutions. It filled me with hope and excitement, knowing that the career I pursue is something so real and so close to the community. It drives me to be rigorous and detailed because they are all real people whose health could be in my hands. And specifically in the matter of COVID-19 vaccination, it feels like saving life on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
Estefania, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation. If I could just ask you one question, what was the most surprising for you out of this process? What surprised you, in a negative or positive way, however you choose to answer?
In a positive way, I never realized the impact that multidisciplinary work could have. And being in this project, I realized how powerful it is. Like, sometimes one could think like, no, these people have different visions from mine, so we are not like compatible to work together. But when you enter in this type of projects and people complement the visions, and I feel that the solutions being like are so powerful because they have passed through many like verification mindsets, and that's great because we have like approach all the social like problems and all the challenges from pretty comprehensive views thanks to the multidisciplinary. So that's been surprising for me.
And that's so fantastic. And you know, if there are any positives that come out of this pandemic, it's that it's forced us to really work together, especially in an even more collaborative way, in a more cross-disciplinary way. So it's really great to hear you say that. Well done, Estefania. Good luck as you carry out the rest of the work and your studies. Indeed, it's such a pleasure for us to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for sticking to time as well. We're doing good. We've pretty much caught up. So let's keep going in that vein. Remember your questions, your comments in the chat function, please, right here at the bottom of the Zoom screen. That's where you can pose any of those questions or comments. I'm going to move straight along to another one of our impact stories. Dr. Chad Perlin is president of the Nicholas Children's Pediatric Specialists and the physician-led group practice of Nicholas Children's Health System. In this role, Dr. Perlin provides leadership related to the development of the vision and strategic growth of health systems. More than 250 employed physicians, 24 pediatric specialty practices and outpatient care centers. He's also a practicing pediatric plastic and craniofacial surgeon. It's almost difficult for me to say. Dr. Perlin is a student in Miami Herbert's executive MBA program and will be talking about leading his specialty pediatric physician team through the COVID-19 pandemic. I can say in advance, thank you for your work, no doubt, and for being in the trenches. And on behalf of all of us here, whether or not we've come under your care, just a general thank you to all of the medical staff from top to bottom who've been so steadfastly helping us move through the last 18 and more months at this point. Dr. Perlin, you're most welcome to unmute yourself, and we look forward to your impact story.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning. So it's really a privilege to be here today, and thank you so much for inviting me, and Professor Mortensen for inviting me. You know, it's interesting for me speaking in this role, and I'm honored, truly honored actually, to be speaking in the role of the student perspective today, despite the kind accolades you gave in the introduction. I love the expression, once you start studying healthcare, you can never finish it. And I think that's so true. I've gone through my MD studies and understood healthcare that way. I went back later in life and did a PhD and understood healthcare from a research perspective. And now one of the greatest aspects of my education has been the last 2 years now understanding healthcare and healthcare leadership from the business perspective at UM School. So it's a privilege to be here. Professor Mortensen asked me to speak a little bit about leadership during crisis in healthcare. And this is a subject that I've now had 2 opportunities to really participate in. The first came during the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. That was my first real exposure to a true acute crisis moment. I saw on TV what had happened that afternoon. Miami is so close to Haiti. And within 48 hours, we organized one of the largest efforts of pediatric surgeons and the first team of pediatric surgeons to be on the island helping. And I learned a tremendous amount from that, which would help me later during the COVID crisis. And I think the biggest lesson that I really learned from there was the expression, the enemy of good is better. And it took me a long time to understand that. But the example that I give is during these very intense moments, you have to be confident in your decision making, but you have to balance what we have versus what we need versus what we're trying to achieve. And an example there was we had an airplane that was ready to go, full of equipment, full of personnel, and we realized we were missing certain key things. And there was a moment of decision, do we stall the flight, try to get back to the hospital, get these things, or do we go? We went. Had we not gone, we would have missed our window. Our plane wouldn't have been able to get into the island for 2 more days, and hundreds of people may have perished. So the enemy of good is better. That's different when people like Alex Azar speaks later about warp speed and the absolute need for perfection. But during this case, we had to get going. And the same really came true to the COVID experience. I think in terms of business school, one of the most amazing coincidences that I don't think I could ever have imagined was at University of Miami in the executive healthcare program. One of the very first exercises that they have the class do, and I think it's one of these things, it's a bit of an icebreaker. It gives the professors a chance to sort of sort out the class and get a feel for the students, was we watched the movie Contagion, which of course is about a virus taking across over the world. And then the exercise was we were divided into groups and said, okay, you have 24 hours to get your hospital ready for this massive pandemic that is taking over the world. That was the first week of January. Most people across the world had not even heard of COVID yet. And again, this was a total coincidence. So this is how I start my business school experience at UM. The first real moment that I remember about the COVID crisis was actually January 25th. I had become well aware at this point of the virus and what was happening, and decided to meet with our head of supply chain. And this, I think, is another important role. No one asked me to do that. I really just felt it was important to check. I didn't check with our CEO of the system. I didn't check with the board of directors. I just called our supply chain director and asked, what's our stocks? What's our supply? What's our system? Are you aware of this? That phone call actually put us in a tremendous position, because we were about a week ahead of many of the other local hospitals in being able to try to get PPE. As the crisis came and really started, and now we're into about mid-March, when the world started to shut down and we had to close surgeries here at the Children's Hospital, I remember giving a speech to our staff, explaining to them that we didn't have PPE. What we had gotten in from that lead at the time were orders placed, but we really didn't have PPE in the beginning. And having to tell the staff that we were facing this virus without having enough, or at that time, did we have the right protection? We didn't know if we were going to be wearing full body suits or just N95s or masks. That was one of the most emotional moments of my career. And we talked about that we all took an oath. We took an oath to serve the community, to serve our patients, and we would figure things out. After that meeting, we really started to get to work on trying to procure PPE. And one of the things that I realized early on was we could not do this alone, and that the need for collaboration across the healthcare systems was so absolutely important. there was PPE offers. We were inundated with it. But the problem was none of us knew what was real, what was counterfeit FDA certificates. Masks would come and you'd open a box and they would be rotten or discarded from things. So how do we together help each other as a healthcare community? And this was another example of the point I made before of just acting. The enemy of good is better. I knew we had to do something. And so what I did was I started a consortium of all of the healthcare systems in South Florida. What I chose to do at that time, and at that time I wasn't president of the physician group, what I chose to do was not, again, go to the CEO and say, we should do this. This is an idea. Let's get everyone together. I just did it, and I did it at the level of the supply chain managers. And I got all of their emails. I begged, borrowed, or stole them from all the resources available. And I put this group together. When you read the paper today about the healthcare consortium that was started in South Florida, you'll read that this was put together by the CEOs. That is perfect. And that's how the world really functions. We know that. But the truth is that it really happened because of the collective leadership of the folks behind the scenes who recognized the need for communication. And, in business school, we talk about competitive advantage. We spent so much time competing with these hospitals that we never spoke. We never had collective forums together. And so putting this together in a way that let us vet PPE, collectively buy PPE, and most importantly, share things when needed, really became critical to our success and at times, frankly, life-saving for people. What was really amazing was seeing the results of how a little bit of collaboration can turn into things so much broader and so much more fruitful and meaningful for a community. The collaborative efforts that developed throughout the last 18 months with COVID across systems that used to compete has been game-changing. And we now have relationships and efforts and programs and are able to serve the community very different than we ever were before, because we let our barriers down. We let the ice melt and thaw between systems that previously viewed themselves as competitors. And because of COVID, we all now saw ourselves against a single common goal, but that has now changed as we start to get back to normal and function again, but we think differently about how we interact as systems. So this has been an amazing experience. I thank everyone for being a part of this, all of the leaders at the University of Miami and healthcare, others across the community. And I'm happy to answer any questions about our experience further. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Well, I guess just one question to wrap up your segment on your last point that you made in terms of how, as we slowly, and that's also relative to, I guess, what part of the world you're in, move back to some form of normality, or new normal, or however we choose to frame it. What is the appetite to go back to the old way of working versus seeing the opportunities as you've just so brilliantly outlaid and figuring out how we make this work on a more sustained basis, collaborating with people who would otherwise have been seen as competitors?
I think it's a brilliant question, and that's going to be the challenge, I think, of the local leadership here in our community, but frankly across the world. Of how do we take the positive things that came out of COVID and not let it get stale, right? Because the tendency will be to go back to competing against each other. That's human nature. That's the nature of business, of course. But yet, I think if we remember those points, and we remember that the key, in my opinion, to all things in life is communication. And if we can keep these lines of communication open and be looking intentionally for reasons now to collaborate instead of waiting for them to come, that will be a game changer.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Chad Perlin. We appreciate your efforts sharing with us today. And as I said at the outset, for you and all of your colleagues working so smoothly throughout the course of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You're more than welcome. Moving swiftly along, let's get a faculty perspective now as we continue with our impact stories. I'm pleased to be able to introduce Professor Eduardo Wills from Uniandes. He's a well-being researcher at the organizational and societal level. He's done research on subjective well-being as an indicator of development of a society or organization. Eduardo links research with mental health issues and how it is impacted by organizational variables, particularly during the time of COVID. He earned a PhD from Tulane University in organizational behavior. Professor Wills, you're most welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Good morning to everybody. I want to share you a very interesting story that we have been implementing at Universidad de los Andes. Mental health and well-being at the university, how to assess and improve mental health and well-being of students and professors and avoid burnout. Well, we all know that this pandemic, COVID pandemic, virtual work, our virtual classes at the university, at our school, have created great impacts on the mental health and well-being in our community. And at the same time, at the university, we have established that the well-being of our students, the well-being of our professors and administrative staff is one of the most important objectives for our strategic and institutional plan in the near future. So we ask the question, how to assess the mental health of our students and the sense of well-being they have, and how can we improve it in the short run and avoid burnout? So what we understood here is that the well-being of our students depend on three main variables. They depend on individual variables, they depend on their familiar background, but particularly important are some contextual variables. And which is one of the most important contextual variables that can influence the mental health and the well-being of our students? It is the sense of well-being that our professors and our administrative staff have. So we wanted to understand which are the organizational variables that influence the sense of well-being of our professors and how this sense of well-being of our professors can be transmitted to our students. Because we think that there is a contagious emotional virtuous circle between the well-being of professors and the well-being of students. So we as an organization, as a university, must take care of the well-being of our professors. Of course, this sense of well-being will depend also on individual and organizational variables, and we wanted to research and understand that from a theoretical and applied point of view. Why it is so important, mental health issues and well-being of our professors and of our students? We understand mental health from a positive point of view, not as an illness, not as a stigma, as it has been traditionally treated. We understand mental health as a possibility that the students and the professors can grow as a person in the organization. So it is a sense of increased well-being in which the individual identifies his potential and capabilities to achieve a positive functioning in life and work. So for us, mental health issues are not considered as an illness, but as an opportunity to grow, to become the person that we want to be in our work, in our life. On the other hand, we also know that the academic activity is a very stressful activity. For instance, professors here in our school, at our university, we are involved in very high quality teaching that demands a lot of time, time spending with students, discussions, and so on, but we have also to publish and perform high quality research, and we are also involved in institutional development. So this academic activity can be a very stressful activity. And the important point here to make is that work conditions have a powerful influence on the subjective well-being of individuals. So we have to define what is well-being. We define it from a subjective point of view. It is a subjective appraisal of satisfaction with life as a whole that the person makes. That's the classical definition of subjective well-being. And of course, job satisfaction becomes one of the most important domains in satisfaction with life as a whole, because we spend more than 1/3 of our time period working. Of course, it is not the only domain that matters for life satisfaction. There are other important domains in life, particularly the quality of social relationships. That's very important for the Colombian context, the standard of living, the health, the sense of security, the support of family, and also the spirituality that has been shown as a high influence in Colombian society. On the other hand, burnout, the World Health Organization has defined it as a syndrome of excessive and chronic stress at work, which is not well managed. That's the important point. It is not well managed. That creates feelings of loss of energy, feeling exhausted all the time for the person, and the person develops a growing distance towards his work. He can become cynic about his work and about his organization. A lot of self-doubt appears. He has doubts about his self-efficacy, about his competences, and very important, he loses the sense of meaning of his job. That is very important for professors at a university context. The other important point here is that burnout begins at work, but it rapidly carries on to the family context and also to the inner social circles of the person. And the question becomes, has virtual work due to the pandemic increased this burnout phenomenon? And what we have learned, or the question we make, is which are the organizational barriers that have to be managed to increase the sense of well-being and the mental health. So we created a research and action plan for this. We made a baseline for measuring mental health and well-being for all of our professors. We conducted a survey with more than 1,700 respondents, and this survey was developed according to a theoretical model. We want to pursue longitudinal follow-ups of this baseline, and then we want to define the principal causes for both mental health and well-being. These causes are related to demographic variables, to the type of roles that the people play in the academic context, the type of contract, his level of job satisfaction, the perceived organizational justice the person finds in the organization, empowerment, and control. This is the main theoretical model of research we made. Our predictor is the quality of work context, particularly job satisfaction, and we measure it. We have as moderated some socio-demographical variables such as age, tenure, gender, distance of travel to the university, and so on. And we assess the most important organizational variables, type of contract, role and status, and so on. And we include very important moderators here, particularly the social-emotional variables, particularly related to the perceived social support the person has in his job. And our dependent variables were mental health continuum and the subjective well-being. We have learned that the main organizational causes of burnout, particularly in the academic context, can be the excessive workload that the professor feels, the perception of loss of control, because professors, we value very highly our autonomy in decision-making related to our teaching, research, and so on. It can be also related to the absence of incentives and recognition, bad interpersonal relations at work, low perception of organizational justice. This is a very important variable related to equity, procedural justice, interpersonal justice, and if you find no adjustment or a disadjustment between your personal and organizational variables. I will show very rapidly some of the results we have. For instance, I can show you here the results for life satisfaction divided between our administrative staff at the university and all the professors. What we find is that in average, the level of response is in a very good level. So university can be considered a good employee. It creates high levels of life satisfaction for the people, but we can find some individuals as exceptions that are in the low quartiles, 25% low quartile, that need attendance, special attention and coaching in the short run. We found, for instance, that life satisfaction of the professors varies according to the role they play in the university. It varies according to the faculty. It varies according to their role, if they are full professors, associate professors, assistant professors, research assistants. And we also find that the level varies according to the different administrative roles. The same for the positive mental health. As you can see, on the average, we obtain good results, but there are very important individual cases that need to be attended in the short run. Also related to job satisfaction and mental health according to the role. Additional variables that are very important to consider in this model are related to hope. For us, hope becomes one of the most important individual and organizational variables that must be taken into account now in the pandemic period. Optimism, the resilience, the capacity the individual has to avoid the difficulties and to go straight, and gratitude. So, which were the main results we found? We found that the type of contract, the role, the autonomy, empowerment of professors, their sense of control, and the intrinsic factors related to job satisfaction are very much influencing mental health and well-being of professors. And as I mentioned, the well-being of professors can be communicated and transmitted in a virtuous cycle to our students. The most important message here is that university can direct an action plan directly to improve these factors. Create focus groups and capacity training for professors in order that we are aware and conscious that the well-being of our students is one of the most important issues to be considered, and that therefore we have to take care of our own well-being. Create consciousness about how sense of well-being of professors influence the well-being of students, identify these critical cases, and design of interventions at the individual level. As conclusions, we can now have the empirical evidences that well-being of professors and students is one of the most important institutional objectives for universities. The sense of well-being of professors is virtually contagious to students. We can develop an action plan at the organizational level, develop a training plan to professors to create consciousness about the importance of their sense of well-being, identify critical cases, and develop interventions at the individual level. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Professor Wells, this is such important work, and really great that we now have the empirical evidence to underpin, I'm sure, a lot of our assumptions that we had anyway, and we can only hope that institutions will take better heed of this kind of research. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. If you have any question, I will be attentive.
Absolutely. And we encourage people to continue posting questions and comments in the chat. For now, I'm going to ask Professor Caroline Mortensen to join me back on screen. I'm very excited about the next conversation that you're going to have the privilege of hearing, but I'll leave it up to Caroline to introduce that. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you. It's truly an honor to introduce our Faculty Impact Factor speakers, Secretary Donna Shalala and Secretary Alex Azar. I'll start just with a brief bio on Professor Shalala. So Donna Shalala has more than 4 decades of experience as an accomplished scholar, teacher, and administrator. She's one of the most honored academics of her generation and is currently Trustee Professor of Political Science and Health Policy here at the University of Miami. Donna was one of the country's first Peace Corps volunteers, and she served 2 years in Iran. I'm skipping over a lot that happened in between just for interest of time. She served as president of the University of Miami, which is an academic campus as well as a major health system, from 2001 to 2015. During her tenure here, UM has solidified its position among the top United States research universities. More recently, Dr. Shalala served as president of the Clinton Foundation until 2017 and as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Florida for one term, 2018 to 2020. In 1993, President Clinton appointed her as U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, where she served for 8 years, the longest serving HHS secretary in the history of the United States. She's been described as one of the most successful government managers of modern times. In 2008, President Bush presented her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award. And in 2010, she received the Nelson Mandela Award for Health and Human Rights. So she clearly has an impressive background. Now, equally impressive is Secretary Azar. He did his undergraduate at Dartmouth College and a law degree from Yale University. After law school, he clerked for Associate Justice Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court of the United States. So one of the nice things we have at the university is this nice balance of the whole political spectrum. Secretary Azar served as the 24th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from 2018 to 2021 under the Trump administration, where he led over 85,000 employees with a budget of over $1.4 trillion, the largest budget of any cabinet department on earth. What he will speak about today is that he was the architect of Operation Warp Speed, delivering COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics in record time. But beyond his work on the vaccine, he also led a historic transformation of the healthcare system in the United States and oversaw much of HHS's response to the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. He drove government efforts to tackle the opioid crisis, increased private insurance options, very important work on price transparency and quality information in healthcare. He also expanded telehealth, gave patients ownership of their electronic health records, and make sure those records are transportable, and all sorts of other efforts on collaboration among healthcare providers. So Secretary Azar has also played some global roles, significant roles in the global health stage, leading many of the United States' global health security efforts. So I really want to thank both of the secretaries for joining us today. Thank you, Rob.
Secretary Alex Azar served as secretary during the Trump administration. He had previously served as general counsel and as deputy secretary in the Bush administration, so he's very knowledgeable about our Department of Health and Human Services, which has responsibility for most of the health care that our national government does. And that includes our programs for the elderly and for the poor, as well as the great scientific agencies of NIH, FDA, and CDC, which are well known around the world. Secretary Azar was in particular personally responsible for the development of the vaccines that are now saving millions of lives around the world. And the organization that did it, the strategy is called Operation Warp Speed. And let me start by asking the secretary to talk a little about how they could hit the ground running. And that involves, from my point of view, decades of scientific leadership by both Republicans and Democrats investing in our scientific enterprises in the United States. Secretary Azar?
Well, thank you, Secretary Shalala, and Professor Mortensen. Thank you for hosting this gathering. Secretary Shalala, as you mentioned, as with all scientific endeavors, every incremental step stands on the shoulders of the previous step. So here, with regard to, especially, let's talk in particular about the vaccine program. We could talk about therapeutics, but let's first talk about vaccines. The vaccine program that became most successful most quickly was the messenger RNA program. And that really built on work that our National Institutes of Health at NIH had been doing of a different delivery mechanism of how can you get a protein into the human body in a way that will be expressed by the cells of the human body to provoke the antibody, the immune reaction that you're looking for in a vaccine candidate. And so we had for at least a decade been working at NIH on messenger RNA as a vehicle, as what we thought could be a very efficient vehicle for doing that in the context of, for instance, the Zika virus. There also were companies looking at mRNA as a delivery candidate for, say, oncology products for cancer prevention. So what happened was within 3 days of our scientists getting access to the genetic sequence of the coronavirus in China, our scientists at the NIH had actually developed a vaccine candidate that could be married with the messenger RNA. And what they did is, because we had already been working with Moderna on messenger RNA vaccine candidates, I think it was Zika, we were able to work very quickly with them to hand that off to them and work with them on developing a vaccine. And so within 6 weeks, we went into human trials. So March 16th, I believe it was, which was the fastest in the history of vaccines that a vaccine had ever gone into human clinical trials because of that pre-existing collaborative work between NIH and Moderna. The Pfizer vaccine, of course, uses that same messenger RNA tactic and some of the same information developed at NIH in terms of the core of the vaccine. But even the other vaccines, for instance, the Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccines, those are based on a chimpanzee adenovirus vector for the basically common cold vector for getting that getting the protein into the human body and causing replication. There, the J&J work, I had personally been involved with that because that was their vaccine candidate for Ebola, which we did clinical trials on in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. That was going on just the year before COVID. So all of these scientific developments stand on each other and build towards that broader scientific enterprise.
But the key was the execution. That is, how do you take the science and turn it into a vaccine and get the production going? And that involved creating a market and paying for that market.
And that's where, having run the US operations of a leading pharmaceutical company, and as you mentioned, having been at HHS for 6 years before, I knew how to bring those tools together of the private sector and the government to really solve 5 business problems. The first is alignment on vision. And that was really about dreaming that we could have enough vaccine for all Americans by the beginning of 2021. Very few people thought that was possible. You know, with the media, the scientific experts, this had never been done in human history before. But I used to say something that was, I guess, a bit of a takeoff on the famous ice hockey player Wayne Gretzky. I would say, you fail to achieve 100% of the goals you do not set. You need to motivate a team. You have to have a compelling vision. You won't get there if you don't articulate that. Now, maybe that's not the most politically wise thing to do because you sometimes don't achieve those things, and that could be regarded as failure. Here, fortunately, we essentially achieved that. The second big thing is personnel. People is policy. So we went to find the best people we could find on earth to tackle these challenges. So we had General Gus Perna, who was the head of U.S. Army Materiel Command for logistics, operations, procurement, contracting, the whole project management. We brought Monsef Slaoui, who was the leading developer of vaccines in the modern history of the world. And we brought in Carlo Di Notari Stefani, who would run global manufacturing operations for one of the world's largest generic and biopharmaceutical companies to solve those problems. The third thing we did is we were able to take money off the table by funding all stages of development of the vaccine. having been at a drug company, I knew the mentality of drug executives, which is what they call de-risking. You de-risk every stage of developing a drug. You test, check the data, and only then invest in the next stage. Test, check the data, and only then invest. And then at the end, only then, once you know you have a drug, invest in how do you take from the very small production of clinical trial material to the large commercial scale manufacturing. So that third and fourth element, fund all development and fund right up front commercial scale manufacturing, because we had the unlimited financial resources of the US government, we could take all of that off the table. We funded the preparations for all stages of development. We began commercial scale manufacturing of vaccines that we didn't even know if would work, so that we would have hundreds of millions of doses. And then the fifth is the point you made, which is we guaranteed a market, because Zika, MERS, SARS, companies had invested millions in drugs and vaccines there, and those viruses had essentially tapered off. We guaranteed a market by making advanced purchase commitments, no matter what, the US government's going to buy this product.
Talk a little about manufacturing, because there's a limited amount of manufacturing here in this country. It also means that these companies had to stop something else to manufacture at this scale, didn't it?
Yeah, so there is a tremendous amount of what we call small molecule manufacturing capacity around the world. That's the ability to make the pills, for instance.
Right.
There's a great deal of that. But this biologic and protein manufacturing is actually relatively limited. And what you have to do is go from, say, a 200-liter bioreactor in which you're cultivating proteins or biologics and growing them, or a chemical synthesis process for generating proteins, or the entities going into the mRNA, and scale that from a 200-liter production size up to, say, 2,000-liter bioreactors. That is not just a math problem. That cultivation of proteins it's almost more art form than it is science, because these are living organisms and they don't behave in ways that are always completely predictable. And so we even had people have to come out of retirement for various pharmaceutical manufacturing entities to bring sometimes lost expertise on how do you create the feeder cell lines, how do you cultivate growth, how do you get enough replication, how do you filter and purify. This is just one example of how crazy this and how really manufacturing was almost as central to the success of Warp Speed as anything else. When you're pouring out the proteins or the biologics that have been grown on the feeder cell lines and you run them through a filter, we found in one instance that if you pour it through at a certain rate, you could actually get an electrostatic film that clogs the filter, and you could lose that entire lot of vaccine production. And you can't predict in advance that's going to happen. It's trial and error in the manufacturing process, which is why we tried to be very conservative initially in planning out distribution, because we always wanted to keep a safety reserve, because especially in early stages of manufacturing, you could very easily have the failure of lots. And with a 2-dose vaccine, we always wanted to make sure we could deliver to people a second dose.
Thank you very much. I think that's as good an explanation of Operation Warp Speed and your incredible leadership, I think, that we could have heard.
Big thank you to both of the former Secretaries for Health and Human Services of the United States of America, Alex Azar, as well as Donna Shalala, who we are hoping to hear from in the panel that's coming up. But first, we're due a break, so that's your time to stretch about, go make yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or whatever your choice is. Looking at the time right now, I'll say at about 20 past the hour. So it's 13 past the hour, my time at 20 past the hour. Let's all be back and look forward to a panel. And I'm happy to see that the Secretary has joined us. So all the good, more reason for you to join us in about 7 or so minutes from now. So welcome back, everyone, and a warm welcome to those of you who have joined us just as we were going to break, or perhaps as we were enjoying a bit of a stretch break. My name is Rob Bemba. I'm a senior advisor with the Global Business School Network. If you've just joined us, you've missed out quite a bit, but not to worry. The session is being recorded as you were warned upon entry, and we'll make sure that the necessary recorded bits are available for you to go and enjoy and appreciate a bit more following the conclusion of this particular session. A reminder, again, if you've joined joined us, please make use of the chat bar at the bottom of the Zoom screen. That's where you can leave your questions or your comments. And again, another reminder, we'll be staying in this particular Zoom room for the remainder of this session, which is our first as part of the Race to Imagine series, as sponsored by Uniandes, and of course in partnership this first session with Miami Herbert Business School and the Global Business School Network. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator for the next panel that's centered on collaborations between industry and academia to achieve more impact in healthcare. Simon Turner is Associate Professor and Director of the Organizations area in the School of Management at Uniandes. Prior to joining them, he, of course, was a Senior Lecturer in Health Policy and Organization at the University of Manchester. He's held postdoctoral research positions at the University College London, King's College London, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and the University of Cambridge. His research interests lie in the application of social science theory and methods to the study of organization and improvement of public services, particularly healthcare. Simon holds a PhD in economic geography from the University of Durham and undergraduate and master's degrees in human geography from the University of Birmingham. He is a principal investigator of nationally funded study on the coordination of change in response to COVID-19 within the Colombian health system. Simon, you are most welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here, and over to you to introduce the panel.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob, for that introduction. I'm just going to share a couple of slides to help with setting up the panel. So we're going to have a panel discussion about collaborations for healthcare leadership, and in particular, the role of collaboration between academia and health systems in achieving a positive impact using something that has affected us all and it's all around us, the COVID-19 pandemic, as a case study. So for this panel discussion, I'm delighted to introduce an international set of panelists. So on the US side, we have Donna Shalala, Secretary Donna Shalala, who has many accomplishments, some of which you've already heard about. And I think listing those again would probably leave us little time for discussion. But from a health system perspective, I just wanted to underline again that Donna served as US Secretary of Health and Human Services under the Clinton administration. She's also a trustee professor and former president at the University of Miami, and a former member of the US House of Representatives for Florida, serving one term there. And then on the Colombian side, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Natalia Mejia, who's Dean of the School of Medicine at the University of Los Andes, and Dr. Gabriel Carrasquilla, who's Vice President of the Academy of Medicine in Colombia. And I want this to be very much kind of an oratory discussion and interactive. I'm hoping that we'll have some debate between representatives more of the academic side and those who've advised health systems, as well as some discussion of perhaps differences in the national context between Colombia and North America that we might explore as well. And once again, those of you that are joining us online, you're very welcome to submit some questions as well in the chat that we can put to any of our panelists. So I think I'll remove the slide for now so we can have a bit more of a face-to-face discussion. So the first thing I perhaps wanted to start with was ask the panelists if they're able to give perhaps an example or story of collaboration, perhaps something that surprised them that they've seen in response to COVID-19 in particular. And perhaps if we're able to come please to Secretary Shalala first, maybe an example of collaboration that you've seen in response to COVID, perhaps something that surprised you in that regard.
Well, the big surprise, of course, was Operation Warp Speed, the ability to build a public-private partnership to basically buy the market out by the federal government, with resources being available, going to the major pharmaceuticals to develop the vaccine and produce it, was almost a seamless process led by Secretary Azar. Luckily, the president at the time had picked a secretary who had deep knowledge of the pharmaceutical industry, of the culture and have pretty good sense of how to do this. We had done some of it during AIDS, where we got the price deeply discounted by purchasing vaccines and getting, but this meant that the pharmaceuticals had to convert their manufacturing plants, switch them to produce the COVID vaccine. And we're talking, of course, about Moderna and Pfizer and J&J.
Okay, thank you very much, Donna, for that example of Operation Warp Speed. I'm sure we'll explore that in a bit more detail during this discussion. I think to get a Colombian perspective now, I'll come to Dr. Gabriel Carrasquilla. And the same question to you in terms of an example of collaboration you saw in response to the pandemic, perhaps something that surprised you.
Thank you, Simon, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for inviting the Academy of Medicine to this very important meeting. I'm very pleased to share this panel with former Secretary Chalala. I can give a couple of examples of collaboration in Colombia during the pandemic. One on the side of the Academy of Medicine, because the Academy of Medicine, which is equivalent to the Institute of Medicine in the US, the Academy of Medicine is advisor by law to the government. So we had a lot of collaboration belonging to committees that the Ministry of Health called for analysis and discussions on how to deal with the pandemic. But in addition, the Academy itself had meetings to analyze the situation and to advise different bodies of the government. We had meetings with mayors of some cities, with secretaries of health of some states of cities, with the National Institute of Health, with National Institute or the equivalent of the FDA here in Colombia, with the associations of private hospitals, with associations with public hospitals, with the Association of Health Insurers, and of course with experts that we could take into account, economists, experts in education, to advise the government. Another collaboration that was very, very important, and I want to underscore this collaboration, was a coalition of the private sector to get vaccines for the government, and that was coordinated by the Fundación Santo Domingo that Estefania already mentioned in her talk. What did this coalition did? The private sector was prepared to advise and to support the government in the purchase of vaccines. As Secretary Azar mentioned, nobody knew whether the vaccines were going to work or not, what the efficacy of the vaccines were. So the private sector, just to protect government officers in the legal issues of purchasing a product that was not yet approved, decided to support this to go ahead with the purchase of vaccines, even without being approved. Once COVAX mechanisms came along in the world, the coalition of the private sector decided to support the government in going for COVAX mechanism, and that stopped the coalition of the government. But the private sector was very much prepared to support the government in the purchase of vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. I'll come now, I think, to Natalia Mejia, just to get her opening remarks as well around collaboration and anything particular that surprised her. Natalia.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Well, I want to give some numbers and get an idea of our city, our country, and our medical school. Bogotá, as the capital of Colombia, has almost 8 million inhabitants with a large young population. Though our capital does not resemble or does not mirror most of the Colombian territory, neither because of access to health, neither because of education or work, or because of public order situation that in some how we are more stable in our city. So in Bogota, we have 13 medical schools, and our medical schools belong to a private university. As you know, we have almost 840 students, 56% of female students. That is a world trend in the last years. And most of our students have financial support for to pay their tuition. So I can have an example, a very good example of a collaborative work between a private health institution, that is Fundación Santa Fe, that is our university hospital, our School of Medicine that belongs to a private institution, that is Universidad de los Andes, and the public health system, that is public, it's a government health support system. And this collaboration, this triangle of collaboration has never been an easy task. But in 2 weeks, we succeed in accessing the population belonging to the public health system through the work of our students, led by 2 epidemiologists from the Fundación Santa Fe and led by our teachers of public health area. So if someone asked me 5 years ago the best way to place these 3 institutions in the same vision, I thought it was an impossible task. So in this case, the adversity forced us to work in a collaborative way, leaving selfishness and private interest aside for the common good.
Great, thank you very much, Natalia. I suppose my follow-up question here would be, how new do you think these relationships were, or were they able to draw on existing collaborations? How formalized were those collaborations? What was new, and what perhaps was maybe latent networks, relationships that were mobilized to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic? Perhaps Secretary Shalala, we can come back to you, please, on that, and then we can go around the panel again.
Well, the relationships are not new, because the National Institutes of Health, the great research universities in the United States, have long had relationships with big pharma in the United States. They sell their licenses. In fact, one of the licenses for production was sold by a university. So, and our FDA, of course, regulates pharmaceuticals and drugs. So everybody knew everybody else. We had previously some experience in pre-purchasing vaccines for children, the flu vaccine, other vaccines during other pandemics, but also as part of the regular process, but never at this scale, both in the production, the research for the vaccine and the production. Of course, the research had been financed over the years by the National Institutes of Health, so they were building on existing experience with other pandemics in which vaccines were being developed and existing science. So it was putting it all together at a very during a very dangerous time in world history, and putting it together quickly. That was the difference. But I think because the relationships were there, because there were long involvements with the private sector and the public sector, and deep investments in science, that's what made a difference.
Okay, thank you very much. Gabrielle, Natalia, do you want to comment on the Colombian side there? And perhaps just to add to that as well, I mean, Natalia, you mentioned this idea of adversity being important in maybe people working together. Chad earlier talked about the importance of shared purpose, as well as Alex Azar. How important do you think that particular adversity was in responding maybe quickly to COVID-19, and how likely is it that could be sustained in the future in response to future health system challenges? Natalia, Gabrielle?
Thank you, Simon. I did a real cartoon with 3 words that describe what we, how we failed in this at the beginning of the pandemic, and for me it was uncertainty, fear, and hopelessness. So these 3 words describe what our students were feeling, what our teachers, the medical teachers, were feeling, but these 3 feelings evolved into 3 different things without predicting it. Each of these 3 institutions, the health public system, the university hospital, and the School of Medicine, began to work despite the anxiety, and they stood up to adapt to the new circumstances in the fastest and most effective way. So if I can describe the innovation of this collaboration, for me, is flexibility, teamwork, and innovation. And I really want that these 3 situations last forever. It's not, it has not been easy to work when we have formally, when we have a different interest, but right now we have a common interest. So I don't think that the relation will die. I think that the relation can strengthen if we think that we can make some allies to give education, not only for our students, but education to the population and the local population. So I think that we evolve and we are mature to strengthen this relationship for a long time.
Thank you, Natalia. Gabrielle, come to you now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. From the Academy of Medicine standpoint, the relationship with governmental bodies will be forever, because the Academy is advisor to the government. Nonetheless, we really had a closer relationships with those governmental institutions like the National Institute of Health or the Food and Drug Administration equivalent for us, which is the INVIMA and other health bodies. Currently, the Academy of Medicine is coordinating a group of health organizations to support the government in having detected the weaknesses of the health system during the pandemic. That came very many weaknesses of the health system, and how to support and to improve and to strengthen health system, particularly primary health care, mental health. As Professor Wills mentioned, mental health is a very big issue, and now we are having meetings regarding what is now called the long COVID, because long COVID is becoming a public health problem, a public health issue, and the Academy is working together with universities, some medical schools like University of Rosario and University of Javeriana, in dealing with this new problem of the pandemic. From the standpoint of the coalition of the private sector, there were some aspects that were worked with this coalition, like looking for the capacity building in Colombia for at least to process the fill and finish processes for pharmaceutical products, and to strengthen industry in being able to bring to the country the capacity building for vaccines in the near future, for example. Over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Gabrielle. And Donna, do you want to say any more about that sense of shared purpose and how important that was in these relationships, and whether and how you think that might be sustained in the context of market-based systems?
Yeah, I actually, we go up and down in this country. Sometimes our Congress gets mad at our scientists because they develop relationships with the private sector, but a crisis, like my colleagues, and I think they made a very good point, crisis brought people together. In the same way, world wars brought people together to work together to convert manufacturing. And it's sad to say that you need a crisis. In this case, we needed a crisis to bring the public and private sector together without much criticism. But it also created other issues, spin-off issues. Operation Warp Speed, as I said to the secretary, was not a good name because it gave the impression that we cut corners on the science, that we did it too fast, that it wouldn't be safe. But you take those kinds of chances when you're dealing with a crisis. And I think my colleagues are exactly right. It's the crisis that brought people that wouldn't ordinarily have worked as seamlessly together.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Donna. I'm going to ask you all now, I think, if you're able to say maybe something about what you think are the main lessons that you can take away from your experiences of collaboration around COVID-19, particularly university health system ones, if possible, and also what are the challenges that remain? What do we still need to address in the future that maybe COVID-19 is highlighted, but we haven't found an answer to yet? So lessons and challenges there. Perhaps I'll come back to Natalia again first.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, the lessons that we've learned are, yes, we can work collaboratively. Yes, the academy can and must have social accountability. Another conclusion is that there are other ways to help society in a pandemic beyond the clinical assistance, such as education, not only for health workers, but for patients and families. And we also learned that we are capable of learning in various ways, and we are capable of finding the way to stretch our hands. And I think that this pandemic showed us that we are more adaptable than we thought, and we did a good dose of grit to get the best out of this situation. So maybe the challenge is to maintain the collaboration between the stakeholders who previously did not have a major joint projects, but to maintain this line of support to the community through the medical schools.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Gabrielle, come to you next. Lessons and challenges.
Yes, Simon, because we dealt with many organizations and different organizations, providers, insurers, governmental bodies, and so on. What we saw is that our health system needs a reform, a structural reform to deal with new health issues, because it was shown, as I already mentioned, the weaknesses of our health system. For example, primary health care. Primary care has to be strengthened. The public sector, as everyone, every country has both health providers in the private sector and the public sector. Our public sector is so deficient in many issues of technology, health personnel, stable health personnel. The contracts are not stable for the people. So the main learning that we had is that we have to work as a country, as a whole, in our health system and see how to improve the healthcare delivery system, going all the way from the promotion and prevention to the healthcare in high-tech hospitals. The other thing that we have already proposed to the government, to the president of the country, as well as to the Minister of Health, is that Colombia should have a panel like the panel that the World Health Organization had to analyze how the pandemic was, what the weaknesses were, what the learnings were, and we have proposed to the Minister of Health and the government to establish a panel to analyze what the challenges are and how to prepare the country and the health system for future pandemics. There is no doubt that we will have future pandemics. When, where, we don't know, but it will come, and the country should be prepared for the next pandemic. We just had, for a few years ago, the Zika pandemic, the chikungunya pandemic. That they were pandemic because they were in many countries in Latin America. So we learned a little bit about that, but now with the coronavirus pandemic, the learning have been very important, and now we propose to have the panel for the country to be prepared for the future.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. So the need to learn from pandemics, perhaps formalize those learning mechanisms as well. I'll finally come to Secretary Shalala on lessons and remaining challenges.
Well, we haven't really finalized our list of lessons, but the main one is, from my point of view, is not a scientific one. It's actually communications. Careful, consistent communication, sticking to the science, yes, but the science doesn't necessarily make policy for us all the time. We often have to do add-ons. So repetitive communications, teaching, educating the public on why we change our rules as we're going along, as the science changes. And we simply didn't do that. We didn't do it in the private sector. We didn't do it in the government. We didn't do it in the media. That kind of careful communications would have made a difference. It isn't because we have some anti-vaxxers in the United States or around the world. It's just we underestimate the power of communications across all sectors and the consistency and the repetition that's necessary. So I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times in March of 2019, I think, saying that that's what we had to focus on.
Okay, thank you very much, Secretary Shalala. So yeah, public communication, the power of communication, really, really key, particularly in the current age, as well in terms of miscommunication and so forth. So we could go on for a long time here. Unfortunately, we don't have a great deal of time. So I think we need to wrap things up now so we can have our breakout groups. But I just wanted to thank once again our international panelists very much indeed for their time and their insights on responding to COVID-19 and collaboration. So thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Simon and fellow panelists, for sharing your insights. We really appreciate the time that you've shared with us today. we're going to keep it rolling. We want to try and end as close as possible to the promised time so that we make up time. Simon, we're going to shorten those breakouts, but we definitely want to have them. So perhaps we'll, with some guidance, suggest that each person in the breakout room, just share very quickly in 60 seconds, bits or thereabouts. Do you want to share with us as we get prepared to put people into those breakout rooms? What ideally you'd like them to discuss? You're on mute, Simon.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Rob. So breakout groups now, we're going to return more. We've talked about kind of healthcare impact. We're going to talk more now about that theme of well-being and returning to the theme that Eduardo talked about earlier in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on well-being and mental health, and thinking about particularly how our places of work and study have been affected. So we have 4 kind of questions here that we'd like you to respond to. So you'll divide into 4 groups. So the main question for group 1 is, what impact has COVID-19 had on your well-being? What helped you to respond? What organizational support did you receive? Maybe this might differ depending on whether you're working or studying. I know we've got a lot of people in the room today, so how does this differ by perhaps different industries and national contexts? The second group, we'd like you to think about how the nature of work and career development may have changed in the light of the pandemic. So maybe thinking here about the labour market and your commitment to your current place of work, or if you're studying, how do you see your future career development? Has your thinking on this changed? For the third group, what skills and capacities will we need to develop to face new challenges? What have we learned from the pandemic in particular? And then finally, for group 4, how should our places of work and study change to promote well-being? So Eduardo talked about some of the effects on academics, but thinking more broadly, how should our places of work and study adapt to promote well-being? What workplace design solutions or interventions can you come up with? So hopefully there's a link in the chat to be able to divide you into those 4 groups and address the question posed. There's a Padlet for recording your responses as well. And feel free to maybe move on to other questions if you finish the first one, but that's how we would like you to work in breakout groups for a few minutes, and then we'll all return back together after that.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So you should be receiving a prompt to join a breakout group and discuss, as is pointed out on the screen, any one of those subjects, and we'll bring everyone back probably just on the hour, and we'll wrap up very quickly. Just a few housekeeping things to share right at the end. So just take a few minutes, have some conversations around what you've heard today, and certainly be prompted by some of what Simon has shared there. So as soon as you get that prompt to be zoomed out of here, so to speak, please do accept it. The link to Padlet Simon has just shared as well in there, so that will be useful to you as you make your way to your various breakout groups. More logistics things to wrap things up. A big thank you to the teams in particular from Miami Herbert Business School, and of course Unyandes, the School of Management. Thank you so much for your partnership, your participation, all of the work that's gone into this session, and certainly all the work that will go into the remainder of this Race to Imagine series as part of GBS and Beyond. The recording, and I can assure you, minus any technical gremlins, will be provided to you in the coming days. I dare say probably next week, more likely. You'll get a recording together with the PowerPoint presentations in a follow-up email. And for those of you who are partaking in GBS and Beyond, our virtual conference, I encourage you to do so. There's still time to register. If you've already registered, you've got access to Hub, in which case this material will live there as well. Please take our post-session survey that's going to be populated right now. I see Alex has done just that in the chat box here on Zoom. And a reminder that the climate change mitigation, as co-hosted by Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University, will be taking place on Friday, October 22nd. That's at 11 a.m. Eastern or 10 a.m. Bogota time, 4 p.m. if you're in Central Europe. Please do sign up for that particular session. And as I said, I hope at that point we would have sorted out all the kinks and you'll get through a lot quicker. This particular session, the climate change session, provides a venue to discuss the role of forests in climate change in particular, features case studies on the enhancement of forest carbon stocks through both afforestation and reduced deforestation, at the very least, strategies. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks to all of you so much once again, and I hope you have yourselves a fantastic weekend. Thanks for joining us, everyone.